that bringing members of the Defence, I think it would quite do the opposite, bringing members of the Defence Forces out onto the streets for security reasons. I really do believe that in Garda Síochána are doing a very fine job.
Supplementary. First question from Deputy Smith.
Minister, I think my colleague here, Deputy Declan Brannock, has made a very reasonable suggestion, and he's not for 1 second suggesting that we have total militarisation on our streets. He's merely suggesting that there is a visibility and a presence against the backdrop of Brexit. And of course, along the 500-kilometre stretched border across Cavan, Monaghan, Louth, and businesses are particularly at the coalface of the exposure of smuggling. And yes, our defence forces are truly missed in Cavan, Monaghan, Castleblaney and Cuthill, where they had troops in the area. Can I suggest, Minister, that in your response there to Deputy Brannock, you talked about the Garda and Garda Síochána and their duty and their remit in all of this. Can I tell you, Minister, in the border region, the Garda Síochána are working against the backdrop of depleted resources. They do not have the capacity to do the job that they have to do. They do not have the supervisory roles in place. And to talk about the Defence Forces not being needed in the area because the Garda Síochána can do that job, well, I'm sorry to tell you, Minister, the reality on the ground is very different across the border area.
My priority as Minister with responsibility for defence is to ensure that the operation capability of the Defence Forces is maintained to its greatest extent possible, and to enable the Army, the Air Corps and the Naval Service to carry out all of their roles assigned by Government. And I have been assured by the Chief of Staff that under its aid to the civil power or the day-to-day duties that members of the Defence Forces are asked to carry out, and the role they are asked to carry out, that they have the capability and the capacity to carry it out on a daily basis. Okay, you've highlighted to me in your own views that members of Garda Síochána are struggling on the border region, but I think that is a matter. I think that is a matter for the Minister for Justice, and for you to address you to address that question to the Minister for Justice.
Deputy Smith, defence up. Another question.
Sorry, Minister, thank you. No, you raised about Garda Síochána's role in all of this, Minister, not me, in your own reply. And the reality of it is, if they have a huge part to play in all of this, and the potential for smuggling along the border region, and the troops are not going to be reinstated in the area, I think it would be remiss to say that the Garda Síochána can pick up the slack for where we don't have troops now on the ground. Because the reality of it is, they are under-resourced, they do not have the manpower or the resources in place. We have local Garda stations closed down all across the border region, and particularly in Cavan, Monaghan. So I think it is unfair for you to say that I should raise that with the Minister for Justice. You in your reply raised it about Garda Síochána. But as I said, we have seen the closure of army barracks. We have seen troops having to leave their family homes and go working further afield, leave their family homes not just for their normal work shift, but obviously to stay further afield for longer periods of time. And I am disappointed here today to hear you say that you don't have any specific plans in place to look at the reinstatement, or as Declan, my colleague Brannock, has quite rightly suggested and made a very fair point, that they are deployed to community resource centres or community centres to show a visibility and a presence, because the Gardaí can't do it themselves on their own. They'll be the first to admit that. And why not have our army out there and the troops out deployed to do that job too?
Final response from the Minister.
Disagree with you. I think it would be sending out the total wrong message if we were to have members of the Defence Forces patrolling local communities around the border region. I think it would be absolutely, totally inappropriate. I would be totally opposed to it personally myself. But as I said from the start, if Garda Síochána request members of the Defence Forces under aid to the civil power, well then, of course, that request will be considered, like all requests. And but I genuinely say this, that after the successful negotiations last week, we're in a space that I thought would be very difficult to get to, where we're not going to have a hard border, where people north and south would be able to continue on in doing business in the way that they have been doing over the last number of years. I remember members of the Irish Defence Forces being on the south side of the border and members of the British forces being on the other side of the border. It wasn't a pretty sight, and I don't want my children to remember, or anybody's kids. We're a totally new generation of people. I don't want them to remember and seeing people of the Defence Forces on the border.